InDesign Secrets video podcast, episode 5, InDesign Guide Tips. This episode is sponsored by the Pattern Maker plugin from Teacup Software. Pattern Maker and its sister plugin Barcode Maker let you build customizable patterns and barcodes directly inside your InDesign documents. I'm Anne-Marie Concepcion, and I'm here with my co-host, David Blattner.
Hello, hello. Today we're going to be focusing on guides, as Anne-Marie said. Let's just dive in here and look at a bunch of cool guide tricks. And one of the most important themes to this whole video cast is guides are just objects. We're going to keep talking about that.
As I drag down a guide from the horizontal ruler guide, you can see that there's a little tooltip that's telling me where my guide is positioned at on the y-axis, but you can also see, that's a CS4 only thing, you can see in the control panel, which is available in every Creative Suite version, that the position of this guide as I drag it. So now that this drag has been placed, it's telling me what its position is. And with it still selected, I can go up to that Y field or press Command or Control 6, our favorite keyboard shortcut for selecting the first field in the control panel, and type the measure that I want. Like, let's say I want it exactly at 2 inches. I can just type 2 and then press Enter or Return, and it jumps to that location. Right?
I love that.
Or I can press Command 6 or Control 6 and type 2.5, and this time hold down the Shift key when I press Return or Enter, and it'll jump to that location but keep the field selected. Or I can type, let's say I'm going to add a little plus 0.5. I want another ½ inch on here, and I can hit Return or Enter and make it go there. Or this time I'm going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key on a PC and press Return or Enter, which puts a duplicate of that guideline at that new location. So just like any object you option drag, you can option drag or option press Return in a field and drag duplicates of your guidelines.
Yeah, I love that ability to change using the Option key in the control panel. Very, very handy. But another way to make duplicates, of course, in InDesign is to use step and repeat. So if I select this object here, I can jump to the Edit menu and say Step and Repeat, and I want, let's say, 4 of these at maybe 2 centimeter increments. Click OK, and I get 4 more guides down on my page. Again, guides are just objects, so you should treat them just the way you treat objects on the page. Same thing for right now. All of those objects, all those guides on the page are they're not exactly the same amount. That I've got too much space up here between these, so I could select all of those and distribute them evenly across the page. Make sure there's the same amount of space, and you can see that right up in the control panel. I have the distribute horizontally and vertically, and I can say use spacing of, let's say, what was that, 2 centimeters, and then distribute, and all of a sudden all of them get distributed exactly 2 centimeters across between those.
Or what I often do is let's say that I just want to make a quick grid. I'll just drag out a whole bunch of guides willy-nilly. Like right here, I'm just dragging a whole bunch here, and I'll do one down here and say that I want this space exactly divided evenly. Then I select all these guidelines and turn off use spacing, which leaves the top guide and the bottom guide in position and distributes the one in between evenly.
That's great.
Right? So use spacing or without use spacing. And did you notice how David and I were selecting these guidelines by dragging a selection rectangle around the guidelines? And it's I find that a lot of people don't realize that you can do that. Instead, they're shift clicking individual guides, which is
tedious.
Difficult. Yeah, very tedious. Just to let you know, though, that if you have some objects on the page and then you drag a selection guideline around the guidelines, if you have any of those objects within the marquee selection, then just the objects will be selected and not the guidelines.
That's a really good point.
Which is usually what you want, right? If you're trying to select something, then you don't want the guidelines selected. If you do want just the guidelines selected, make sure that your selection marquee doesn't include any objects on the page. And then the guidelines will be selected. Now that these are selected, I can press the Delete key and get them all out of there.
Yep. Actually, let's put those back there for a second, because I want to talk a couple more things about deleting. Yeah, so so Anne-Marie undid that. I wanted to point out a couple more things about selecting objects on the page. This one is something we just learned recently, and kind of embarrassing that we didn't know this one. But if you select a guide, I just clicked on this first one, look up here in the control panel. Check out those 2 little buttons up there. It's always good to pay attention to which buttons are grayed out and which aren't.
The Martian pointing right and the Martian pointing left.
Exactly. And that means because a guide is selected on the page, and only a guide is selected on the page, that means select the next guide. And it's actually going down down. It's a little bit hard to tell on the screen here because we're going to two different values of blue. But basically, it's selecting the next guide and the previous guide on the page, and that's next and previous based on the order in which the guides were created, not necessarily where they sit on the page. But that is very handy. And the other cool trick for selecting your guides is to select all the guides on your spread. Command Option G or Control Alt G will select all the guides on the spread. Often I've got just way too many guides. I just want to clear it all up, start over from scratch, hit the keyboard shortcut, hit delete, and then they're gone.
That's right. That's excellent. Let's undo that to get those guides back there.
Okay.
And you're saying that the problem is that we're looking at two different colors of blue.
Yeah.
And people often wonder, well, why is it this color blue when I select it? And that's because it is the color of the layer that the guide is sitting on. Because guides sit on layers. So, for example, if I wanted the color of these guides to be different, I could just double-click the layer and change the color of the layer itself. So, let's say I change the color of the layer to blue. That would not make any
You're
sense.
into blue today.
Let's change the color of this layer to orange. All right. And so now when I select a guideline, then it turns orange as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So this is the normal color of unselected guides. Now if I create another layer and I can take a guideline and select it, and you'll see that it gets this little proxy icon. I can drag it up to layer 2. And there it is with that default color. And David, you like to make a guide layers specifically to hold your guides, right?
I do. I almost always have a layer which is just a guides layer. So I'm going to come over here and Option click or Alt click on the new new layer button, and I'm going to say this is going to be my guides layer, and choose a color that you're going to pick. I'll just leave it set to red right now. Click OK. And now I'm going to select all my guides. Again, I'm using my keyboard shortcut Command Option G, and I'll move all of those up to my guides layer. So now they're all on the guides layer, and that's really cool for a couple of reasons. The first reason is you can turn them on and off very easily just by hiding or showing that layer. But even more important to me is the ability to lock those guides. I like to have them all on one layer that I can lock them or unlock them. And you can select just the guides. Sometimes I'll actually have multiple guide layers, and I want to select just the guides on a particular layer. Don't forget the trick of Option or Alt clicking on a layer will select all the objects on that layer, and because this layer only has guides, it will select all the guides on that layer. So
I guess that makes sense. Though I would normally go to the View menu and go down to the Grids and Guides and choose Lock Guides from there, or use the keyboard shortcut to lock guides and unlock guides.
Oh, okay. I suppose you could do that too. Yes,
Or something else that people might not realize is that within this particular layer, you can choose to show or hide guides in that one layer. So if you have a layer just for all your display ads, for example, and you use guidelines to align elements for your display ads, and you don't need them to align page elements, you can turn off hide guides when you're done with the display ads, and that way it cleans up the display of guides on your page, which can sometimes get overwhelming.
A couple more things that you were talking about changing the color of guides by changing the layer color, but let me deselect all of those just by clicking on the page here. You can also change the layer color of an individual guide. Right now, the main color here is this cyan blue color. But if I want to change the color of some of these guides, I'll just select that one and this one and this one. And let's say I want to change the color of those. Select them and then right-click or Control-click on a button mouse and choose Ruler Guides. You don't even have to do that.
Or you can just select it from the Layout menu.
Yeah, Layout menu, Ruler Guides. It's the same thing.
Yes.
And inside Ruler Guides, you have two options: threshold and color. Let's say I'll change my color to violet. Make that a different color on the page and click OK, and you'll see that change. But before we click OK, I want to point out threshold. Really cool feature. It lets you set how close you need to be to that guide in order to keep seeing it. And because it's set to 5%, it means we can pretty much always see the guide. But if we change this to, let's say, 50%, something different will happen. Let's go ahead and click OK, and we'll see what that is. First, I'll deselect everything on the page, and you can see that these guides are violet.
That's right. No, the guides will remain violet regardless of which layer they're on.
That's right. Good point.
FYI.
Very good point. Because it doesn't change what color they are when you select them. It changes what color they are when you deselect them.
That's right.
Now I'll zoom back, and I'm at 75%. I can see up here in the app bar and in the tab here. We're at 75%. I'll go back again, and we can still see them because we're at 50%. But if I move down to, let's say, 49%, I'm just going to go down a little bit more. they disappear because they drop below that view threshold. So you can have different guides at different thresholds, so they're visible or invisible depending on how close you are zoomed in on the page.
That's right. So if you've inherited a layout that somebody has done in their guide happy, and there's 10,000 guides all over the place, and you don't want to get rid of the guides, but it's impossible to see what's happening on the page as you zoom out. Notice that the guides, they don't change width or weight as you zoom out; they stay the same. Then you can just select the guides and change their view threshold for ruler guides. That way they'll disappear when you're zoomed out.
I just want to point out one more thing about zooming in and out. It just occurred to me. This has to do with creating guides. I'm going to create a new page, Command-Shift-P, and zoom out here. If I'm dragging guides out onto the page, earlier on we were talking about how when you let go of a guide, sometimes you get these really strange measurements.
Right.
One alternative is to hold down the Shift key while you're dragging the guide. The Shift key will snap the guide to the nearest ruler tick mark. So you can see up here, we're at 2 point whatever, and just right at that tick mark, 2.75, it snaps right to that. That is really, really handy.
I love that feature.
And again, I don't know, I want to get it right at 4.5, but I can't quite do it. Just press the Shift key, and it'll snap right to 4.5. And the reason that popped in my mind is the closer you're zoomed in, the more tick marks you get, right? So you can snap to finer precision.
I find this is really useful when you're working with picas and points. It's like I'm going to change this top ruler to picas by right-clicking right on it and changing it, and holding down my mouse button a little bit longer and going down to picas.
Great, yeah.
Right? And so now, like if I'm zoomed out to fit in window and I start dragging a vertical ruler over, then notice, and I hold down the Shift key, 10 pica, 0, 11 pica, 12 pica. But if I zoom in pretty closely and then I start dragging, I continue shift dragging that ruler, then it goes in 3-point increments. So, which I find very useful. So now, basically these days I almost always shift drag guidelines. I don't just drag and drop them.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Well, I think that's about it for episode 5. Be sure to check out the show notes on our blog at InDesignSecrets.com. We'd love to hear what you thought of this show. Leave a comment there or in the show notes or at iTunes if you're leaving comments there. Or go ahead and email us at info@InDesignSecrets.com. Until we meet again, this is David Blattner and
Anne-Marie Concepcion for InDesign Secrets.